Hi, my name is Era. They say pain makes you stronger, but no one tells you that before it builds you. It breaks you into pieces so small you can barely recognize yourself. I used to be someone else entirely, a girl with dreams bigger than her fears, a heart full of love, and a ring on her finger. My name is Era, and once upon a time, I believed in forever. I believed in Ethan. We met like people do in fairy tales, by accident that felt like fate. He spilled coffee on my sketchbook in a crowded cafe, and I was furious, but he offered to buy me a new one. It wasn't the sketchbook that mattered. It was how he looked at me like I was something rare. That look made me trust him. It made me fall. Fast. We got engaged 1 year later, on the edge of a quiet beach at sunset. He knelt in the sand with a trembling hand and told me he couldn't imagine a life that didn't start and end with me. I believed him. Every word. Maybe that's why it hurt the way it did, sharp and sudden. When everything fell apart, it started with a headache, just a small one. Then came the fatigue, the weakness, the dizzy spells. I brushed them off, kept going to work, kept painting, kept smiling. Until one morning I collapsed on the floor of our apartment, my vision swimming in and out like waves crashing against glass. I remember Ethan shouting my name, the panic in his voice, the ride to the hospital, the fluorescent lights overhead. I remember thinking, it's probably just stress. But it wasn't stress. It was something else. Something with a name too long, and a treatment plan even longer. The doctors said it with sympathy in their eyes. Autoimmune. Chronic. Unpredictable. I heard the words, but they didn't land. Not until I saw Ethan's face as the reality set in. Not until he started staying out later. Not until the light in his eyes began to dim whenever he looked at me. Illness changes you. Not just your body, but everything around you. It exposes what people are made of. The first time Ethan forgot to come to one of my treatment sessions, he said he was caught in traffic. The second time, he didn't say anything at all. By the third time, I stopped expecting him. I sat there alone with IVs in my arms, staring at the sterile walls, wondering how love could vanish so quickly. He still lived with me, but he wasn't really there. He talked less, touched less, loved less. I tried to understand. I told myself he was scared, overwhelmed, human. But deep down, a part of me knew he was slipping away, like sand through open fingers. The night he left, he didn't even have the courage to tell me to my face. He packed his things while I slept on the couch after another long round of treatment. I found the note in the kitchen, folded neatly beside the coffee maker.
I'm sorry, Ada.
I can't do this anymore. I still love you, but I'm not strong enough. Please understand. I stood there staring at the ink until it blurred through my tears. People think heartbreak is loud, that it screams and shatters like glass. But mine was quiet. It sat in my chest like a stone, heavy and unmoving. I didn't chase after him. I couldn't. I was too weak, too broken, too tired. So I let him go. I told myself if he couldn't love me sick, he didn't deserve me whole. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it yet. Healing is messy like that. It doesn't happen all at once. It crawls through you slowly, unsure of whether it's allowed to take up space again. The treatments continued, some days worse than others. I lost my hair, my strength, parts of my identity I hadn't realized were tied to my health. But I kept painting. Somehow, through the fog and the fatigue, my hands remembered the motion. My emotions poured out in strokes and smears of color. It was the only thing that made me feel real. One day, a nurse named Laura asked if she could show one of my paintings to her cousin who worked at an art gallery. I laughed, told her it was just a hobby. But she insisted. Said it had soul. I let her. I had nothing left to lose. 2 weeks later, the gallery reached out. They wanted to display my work in a small exhibit. I almost said no. Who would come? Who would care? But something told me to say yes. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was desperation. I attended the opening night in a borrowed wig and a dress I hadn't worn in months. The room was small but full. People wandered past my paintings with quiet awe. Some asked questions. Some just stood there. One man cried. That night, 3 pieces sold. Then 5. Then all 10. Suddenly, I had a website, a manager, a waiting list.
I was still sick.
But I was also something else again, an artist.
Alive.
Rebuilding. The treatments started working better. My doctor tried a new protocol. Slowly, my strength returned. My hair began to grow back. My energy came in waves, not drops. After nearly 2 years, the word remission appeared in my medical file. The pain didn't disappear, but it became manageable. My world opened again. I started traveling, local at first, then international. I gave a talk in Paris, held a workshop in Italy. My story, of survival, of betrayal, of finding purpose, made its way into magazines, blogs, even a small segment on a morning TV show. I didn't ask for fame, but I had something better than fame. I had purpose. I had value. I had worth. And then Ethan came back. It happened on a rainy Tuesday. I had just returned from a gallery show in Singapore. My phone buzzed with a number I hadn't saved, but that my bones remembered. I ignored it. It rang again. Then came the message. I saw you on TV. You look beautiful. I've thought about you every day. My stomach turned. I stared at the words, unsure if I wanted to scream or laugh or cry. He had vanished when I was my worst. Now I was cured. Now I was successful. Now I was someone worth remembering. And he remembered. Of course he did.
I didn't respond that day.
I needed space. Clarity. But the past never waits politely. It crashes in. The next day, he showed up outside my studio. I wasn't expecting it. I had just finished teaching a private session and stepped outside to the soft gray drizzle of a spring afternoon, and there he was, standing under a broken umbrella, wearing that same hesitant smile I used to fall into. For a moment, I didn't move. Neither did he. We just stood there, time unraveling like thread between us. He looked older. Not much, but enough. Tired eyes. Slight stubble.
Familiar coat.
I opened my mouth, but no words came. He stepped forward. Said my name. Just that. Soft and aching. I didn't answer. My silence did.
He tried to explain.
Said he'd been young. Scared. Said he hated himself for leaving. That he followed my journey from afar. Every post, every article. He called me brave. Said he always knew I was special. I listened, not because I wanted to forgive, but because I wanted to understand the shape of his regret. He told me he never stopped loving me. That he wanted another chance. That he was ready now. But all I could hear was the silence of that hospital room. The crumpled note beside the coffee maker. The nights I cried into my pillow while he built a life without me. Still, a part of me trembled. Not because I still loved him, but because part of me wanted to believe in redemption. In people changing. In the possibility that someone could leave and still be worth something. But the truth is, people don't come back for love. They come back for comfort. And I had become comfortable. A woman healed. Accomplished. Admired. Worth returning to. And that's what scared me the most. The thing about people like Ethan is that they don't just return, they try to rewrite the past. In the days after he showed up at my studio, he began weaving himself carefully back into my world like a thread I hadn't asked for. He started small. A text here. A coffee left at my doorstep there. He followed my gallery updates online and commented things like, "So proud of you," and "I always knew you'd make it." I didn't block him. I didn't answer either. But his presence lingered in the air like the scent of smoke long after the fire is gone. And I hated that a small part of me still remembered what it felt like to be loved by him, even if that love had run when I needed it most. A month passed. My manager, Elise, noticed the shift in me before I did. She cornered me one afternoon, her perfectly manicured fingers tapping the edge of her tablet. She asked if I was okay, if I needed time, if something was pulling me backward. I told her I was just tired. She didn't believe me, but she let it go. The truth was, I had started to feel unsettled. Not broken, not bruised, but like someone had nudged the painting of my life a little off-center. My routines were the same. My health was still steady, but something unseen was shifting. And then came the gala. It was hosted by the benefactor of one of the largest art foundations in the region. They were honoring contemporary artists who had risen from adversity, which apparently was a polite way of saying, "You nearly died, but now you paint nice things." I didn't care much for the sentiment, but the exposure was valuable, and my name was one of the headliners. I wore a silver dress, minimal makeup, and my confidence like armor. The venue glittered with chandeliers and the kind of guests who whispered names with reverence and judgment in equal measure. Cameras flashed. Champagne flowed. I mingled, smiled, nodded. And then, near the stage, I saw him again, Ethan. This time in a tailored suit, holding a wine glass like he belonged. Before I could decide how to react, he walked over with a small smile and a casual, "You look beautiful, Era." I mean it. I wanted to ask what he was doing there, but I already knew. The foundation had released a press packet with my name, my bio, my success. I had become visible, and he had followed the light. He talked like we were friends, asked about my upcoming exhibit, mentioned a startup job he'd picked up in marketing. He was clean-shaven now.
Polished.
Polite. Even a little charming. It was the charm that scared me most, because it reminded me of the beginning. That night, after the gala ended and my heels were killing me, I got into the car and stared at my reflection in the window. I should have felt powerful, triumphant. Instead, I felt something darker tugging at me, doubt. And doubt is dangerous. It's not loud. It whispers. It says, maybe he's changed. Maybe he's sorry. Maybe you're still unfinished. But I knew better. And still, I answered his next message. It was simple. Want to grab a coffee sometime? Just talk. I said yes. We met at the same cafe where we first met, like some cosmic loop trying to rewrite itself. The barista recognized me now, asked if I wanted my usual. Ethan raised a brow and said, "Famous now, huh?" I shrugged.
He talked.
I listened. He said all the right things. He never stopped thinking about me. He regretted leaving. He wanted to be someone I could trust again. He didn't ask for anything. Just a chance to earn space back in your life.
I didn't say no.
But I didn't say yes either. What I said was, "We'll see." What followed were weeks of him gently inserting himself into my orbit. He sent good morning texts. He showed up at my open studios. He once left a bouquet of my favorite white tulips at my door without a note. He seemed softer, humbler. And I started to believe that maybe he had changed. Maybe time had sanded his edges. Maybe people really did grow. Until one night, I came home and found him waiting on my stoop. He stood as I approached, hands tucked into his coat pockets, eyes wide with hesitation. "I know I shouldn't be here unannounced," he said, "but I need to tell you something." He looked pale, like the truth inside him was something trying to claw out. "I got fired," he confessed. "The startup collapsed. I don't have much right now. I just didn't want you to think I was here for reasons." I stared at him. For once, his timing was believable. But something in my gut clenched. Because no matter how honest he seemed, I'd learned that honesty isn't just about what's said. It's about what's withheld. I let him inside that night, just into the living room. I made tea. He sat on the edge of the sofa, like a guest in a museum, afraid to touch anything. He asked about a painting above my fireplace, one I titled Resilience. I told him it was about learning that being alone doesn't mean being empty. He didn't respond, just nodded, slowly, like the words had bruised something in him. Days passed. He started showing up more often, helping with errands, offering small fixes around the house. Once, he brought takeout and stayed to watch an old movie. Nothing happened.
No kissing.
No long stares. But the presence was there, like smoke curling through the cracks. I didn't stop him.
Part of me didn't want to.
But one evening, while I was away for a gallery weekend in another city, I received a call from Elise. Her voice was calm, but tight. "Hey, Era, did you give someone access to your storage unit?" My blood went cold. The unit she was referring to held dozens of archived canvases, some unsold, some private. It also held a safe. Inside were originals of my contracts, my private journals from my sickest days, even the first sketches I ever made in treatment. I had never shared the code. Never needed to. I flew home early, rushed straight to the storage facility. Nothing looked touched. But the safe had been moved.
Slightly.
Just a few inches. And I saw it, the scratch marks near the lock. Someone had tried to open it. I didn't confront him immediately. I waited, observed. The next time he came over, he was cheerful, relaxed. Talked about some freelance work he was picking up, how maybe one day he'd like to work in the arts. He even mentioned how interesting it was that my brand was worth so much now. I smiled, pretended, but inside, I was cataloging every word. 2 days later, I hired a private investigator. I told myself it was paranoia, that maybe I was overreacting. But the truth is, I needed to know who I was dealing with. And what the investigator uncovered cracked whatever illusion I had let form. Ethan hadn't just been fired. He was drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed. 2 lawsuits from previous clients. He'd also applied for a business loan a month ago, using my name, my brand. He hadn't forged my signature, yet. But he'd mentioned me as a partner in a pitch deck to investors. There were screenshots, emails, evidence. It was never about love. Not really. It was about access. The night I confronted him, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply handed him the documents. Watched his face drain of color. Watched the carefully built mask crumble. He tried to explain. Said he had messed up. Said he was desperate. That he still loved me. That it had started with good intentions. But I had heard enough apologies in hospitals and empty apartments to last a lifetime. I told him to leave. Told him not to contact me again. And then I changed every lock. Closed every account. Burned every bridge he could ever use to crawl back. But the twist wasn't done yet. A week later, I received a letter. Not from Ethan, but from his ex. A woman I'd never met. She had seen my story, recognized him. She had been with him during the first year of my illness. While he was confused, he was also sleeping in someone else's bed. She left him when she found the engagement ring I still wore then in a drawer beside another girl's bracelet. She wrote that she had never reached out before because she figured I knew that I was stronger than most and didn't need the added pain. But now she said I deserved the truth, that Ethan never got scared. He got bored. I read the letter once, then again, then a third time, and I didn't cry, because tears were for people who lost something worth grieving. What I had lost was illusion. And that night, for the first time in years, I painted something not from pain, but from power. I called it Return to Self. After the truth came out, after Ethan's mask fully shattered and his betrayal had no shadow left to hide in, something strange happened. Not grief, not rage, just stillness. Like when a hurricane finally passes and all you can hear is the sound of your own breathing. The days that followed were quiet. I continued my work, attended gallery meetings, returned emails. From the outside, nothing seemed different. But on the inside, everything had changed. There was a cold clarity now, a brutal honesty inside me that no longer entertained daydreams of second chances. Then the award season arrived. The International Independent Artists Federation, ICF, announced their nominations. It was the biggest recognition in my field, the kind of award that launched artists into the stratosphere. I had been shortlisted, one of 5. When I got the call, Elise cried. I didn't. I just sat down, let it wash over me, and whispered, "Of course." Not from arrogance, but because I had earned every inch of this. And then, just a week before the award ceremony, something unexpected happened. A journalist reached out. Her name was Naira Chase, known for writing investigative exposés with depth and grace. She said she was doing a piece on how trauma influences genius, and that she'd love to feature me. I hesitated. I'd been through enough interviews, enough camera crews trying to turn my pain into plot. But Naira was different. She had read everything. She referenced not just my interviews but quotes from my journals, entries I had once shared in therapy-based workshops. She spoke like someone who didn't want to steal my story. She wanted to understand it. We met for coffee in a quiet art cafe uptown. She didn't bring a recorder, just a small notebook and a genuine smile. Her first question wasn't about Ethan or illness or fame. It was, "Do you feel free now?" And I didn't know how to answer. Because the truth was, I wasn't sure. Healing wasn't a straight line. Some days, I still touched the scar of his absence, like a memory I didn't choose to keep. The interview turned into a conversation. Then a friendship. Naira came by the studio more than once. Observed. Listened. She never asked for drama. She asked for insight. She stayed late once, helping me rearrange canvases for an upcoming exhibit. That night, as we sipped tea on the studio steps, she told me her own story. A younger sister who died of leukemia, a fiancé who left during the funeral week. She understood grief intimately. That's when I realized why I had let her in. But just when things felt still again, the twist came, loud and vicious. A leak. A story posted online by a gossip blog. Sick girl turned art star. Did she fake her illness for fame? It featured old hospital forms taken out of context, medical jargon twisted into misleading headlines. It claimed I had exaggerated symptoms, had milked tragedy into popularity. Worse, it included anonymous quotes from someone close to the artist saying, "She always knew how to cry pretty." I knew it immediately.
Ethan.
He had found a way to stain me again. When I confronted the blog, they claimed legal protection under free speech. The articles spread. Not mainstream, but enough to cause damage. My inbox flooded. Some defended me. Some demanded answers. My sponsors asked for statements. One gallery froze an upcoming collaboration until further clarification. I felt the walls tighten again. The past was clawing its way back to the surface. But I didn't crumble this time. Instead, I went quiet, strategized. Elise and Naira both pushed for public statements, for a legal response. But I wanted more than just defense. I wanted to end this, permanently. I dug. And what I found was darker than I expected. Ethan hadn't just leaked the story. He had been trying to pitch a book. A memoir from the ex-fiancé of a fallen angel turned icon. He'd shopped it to 3 publishers, each one passing, until the blog picked up his angle. In one version of his manuscript draft, he actually wrote, "She left me when she got rich." Not the other way around. He had rewritten the story, flipped the narrative. It wasn't just betrayal now. It was delusion. Dangerous delusion. That's when I made the call. Not to lawyers. Not to PR firms. To Lydia. She was my youngest student at the community center. The one who once stood at my wedding disaster and said, "She taught me to be heard." Her mother worked in a non-profit media watchdog group. I asked for a quiet meeting.
No noise. No campaigns. Just facts.
Lydia's mom delivered more than facts. She uncovered receipts. Voice recordings Ethan had sent to one of the bloggers bragging about how no one ever fact-checks drama. That was all I needed. 2 days later, Naira published a follow-up piece. A clean, unflinching takedown titled, "The Truth Behind the Paint," Era's voice in her own words. It quoted hospital records, doctor statements, the Juilliard letter that had once shattered my silence. And it included one final thing, a short audio clip of Ethan laughing as he told someone, "If she paints another sad girl, she'll be a millionaire again by Monday." The internet turned, not in rage, but in quiet disgust. Ethan's name began to rot in digital spaces. Gallery owners emailed apologies. The frozen exhibit? Unfrozen. One of my canceled deals came back with an even higher offer. But I wasn't celebrating, because damage leaves residue. A few days before the IIF ceremony, I went for a walk through the park near my old apartment. It was evening, the kind of light that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. I passed the bench where Ethan once kissed my forehead and promised, always. I stopped, just for a second, then kept walking. At the ceremony, I wore a black velvet gown. My hair curled in soft waves. Elise stood beside me, Naira 2 rows back, and Lydia in the audience with her mom. I didn't expect to win. But when they called my name, I didn't freeze. I walked the stage with calm steps, took the award, and looked out into a sea of faces that once only saw the surface of my story. I didn't give a rehearsed speech. I said, "Thank you. Not just for this, but for seeing me whole. Not as a victim. Not as a miracle. Just as someone who refused to disappear." The applause wasn't thunderous. It was honest. Later that night, I found a card tucked into my handbag. It wasn't signed, but I knew who it was from. The handwriting matched a note Ethan once left me on my birthday. It said, "You're finally everything I imagined." I didn't burn it. I pinned it beside the Juilliard letter and the wedding invitation someone once crossed out with, the one they should have celebrated. A reminder that people don't always change. But we can. We can rise. And I had. Success, I learned, doesn't erase pain, it just builds taller walls around it. After the ceremony, after the applause and the photos and the carefully worded articles celebrating my resilience, life didn't slow down. It sharpened. New opportunities came fast. A solo exhibit in New York, an art residency in Kyoto, even an invitation to speak at an elite women's summit in Madrid. And yet, something inside me was stirring. Something unquiet, unclosed. The deeper I stepped into this new, thriving world, the more I became aware that I was still dragging parts of my past behind me like old luggage I hadn't dared open. It began one night in my studio. The room was quiet, filled with the faint smell of oil paint and jasmine tea. I was working on a new piece, something abstract and brutal and louder than anything I'd done before. But halfway through a brushstroke, I froze. My hand shook. The canvas blurred. For a moment, I wasn't in the studio. I was in the hospital bed again, tubes in my arms, the echo of flat tones on the monitor pulsing like a memory I didn't invite. I dropped the brush. Panic attacks weren't new to me, but I hadn't had one in over a year. Not since remission. Not since Ethan's final unraveling. But here it was, creeping back like smoke under a door. I leaned against the wall, my breath shallow, my heart pounding as if it remembered everything my mind tried to forget. When it finally passed, I sat on the floor and stared at the painting. That's when I realized something vital. My body had healed, my career had soared, but my soul had unfinished business. 2 days later, I made a decision I didn't announce, not even to Elise or Naira. I went home. Not to the apartment I had once shared with Ethan. Not to the city skyline I had grown used to seeing as my view. I went back to my childhood town, small, moss-covered, and heavy with memory. I booked a modest Airbnb on the edge of the river and drove there without telling anyone. I needed silence. Not applause. I needed to face the parts of myself I had spent years painting over. The town hadn't changed much. Same rusted stop signs. Same bakery with the crooked "Closed Mondays" sign in the window. But the house, my mother's house, looked older.
Smaller.
The garden was overgrown, the mailbox hanging on by a single rusted screw. I didn't go inside. I just parked across the street and watched it for a while, like it might speak to me. Later that evening, I walked through the town square. The bookstore was still there. So was the old music hall where I played piano once before I ever knew what an autoimmune disease was. I sat on a bench under the statue of our town's founder and remembered being 16, full of raw talent and hope. Back then, I thought success would feel like revenge, that showing them all would fix the cracks inside me. But now, sitting here with a national award in my bag and gallery offers stacking up like postcards, I felt something entirely different. Empty relief. That night, I found myself scrolling through my email, and that's when I saw it. A message from someone unexpected. A name I hadn't seen in over a decade. Harrison Lovell. He had been my first true mentor. A recluse of a painter who once taught a weekend class I attended as a teenager. He was the first person who told me my art had breath. Who said, "This isn't just talent, Era. This is truth. Don't let them shrink it." The email was short. I've been watching. You've become something they can't box. I'm proud. If you're ever near the coast again, visit me. He lived only 2 hours away. So I did. His studio was tucked into a cliffside overlooking the ocean. When I arrived, he greeted me like no time had passed.
No judgment.
No explanation required. We spent the afternoon in silence, painting side by side. He didn't ask about Ethan. He didn't ask about illness or fame. Only when we were packing up did he speak. There's more ahead, you know. This isn't your peak. It's your midpoint. That night, I stayed at a quiet inn by the beach. I opened my laptop, intending to check exhibition logistics. Instead, I found myself staring at a blank document titled, "The Things I Didn't Say." I began to write. Not for publication. Not for performance. Just for me. It started as a letter to myself. Then to Ethan. Then to the girl I used to be. I wrote until sunrise. The next morning, I called Elise and told her to delay my New York show. 1 week, I said. Just one. She hesitated, then agreed. That's when the final twist began. Back in the city, waiting for me in my studio mailbox, was a package.
No Sendaname.
Just my name scrawled across the top in messy cursive. Inside, a stack of letters. Old, yellowing, each one sealed in different handwriting. At first, I thought it was junk. But then I saw the return address, St. Augustine Rehab Center. My heart stopped. It was where my father had spent his last years. We weren't close, he'd left when I was 10. But we had reconnected through a few letters during my illness. I hadn't seen him before he passed. My mother never let me. Said it would disrupt my recovery. But now, here were letters, dozens of them. All written to me. All hidden. The postmarks dated over 2 years. I flipped through, my hands trembling. In one, he wrote, "I see your name in the papers. I see your colors on canvases. I hope you know I'm still proud, even from a distance." Another said, "I tried to be better. I failed. But you didn't. You're the proof that broken things can still build something lasting." And then, tucked between them, one letter with different handwriting. My mother's.
Short.
1 paragraph. It said, "I thought I was protecting you, but I see now I was only protecting myself. I should have given you these. Forgive me if you can." I sat there for hours, surrounded by letters I was never meant to read, tears falling like rain from a sky I couldn't see. But these weren't tears of weakness. They were release. For the girl who was sick. For the woman who rose. For the silence I had carried for too long. The next morning I painted again. Not to prove anything. Not to earn redemption.
Just to speak.
The canvas was large, raw linen. I used no sketches. No plan. Only feeling. It took me 3 days. When it was done, I titled it, Inheritance. Not the inheritance of money or legacy, but of silence. Of lost letters. Of strength built in the shadows. And that's where section 4 ends. At the edge of truth finally being reclaimed, when I returned to the city for the rescheduled gallery exhibit, the energy felt different. Not louder, but more precise, like everything was exactly where it needed to be. The venue, a converted museum atrium filled with glass and shadow, was bathed in soft amber light. The centerpiece of the exhibit was the new painting I'd titled Inheritance. It hung alone on a white wall, a single spotlight capturing its layered texture. It was abstract, raw, impossible to fully explain. People stopped in front of it, some for seconds, others for minutes. One woman whispered, "It feels like something I forgot I survived." And maybe that was the point. The press came in waves, asking their usual questions. What inspired this piece? What did it symbolize? Would there be a book deal? A film? I smiled, gave the polished answers, but the real truth I kept tucked inside my chest like a secret seed still growing. Not everything had to be translated into words. What I didn't expect that evening was who else had returned. Not Ethan this time, but Caleb. I hadn't seen him in years. Caleb had been a quiet but steady presence during my early treatment days, a fellow patient with a crooked smile and a voice that never rose above a whisper. We met in the waiting room, exchanged nervous laughter and granola bars. At the time, I had been too consumed by survival to consider what he really meant to me. He moved away after a major surgery, and life took us in opposite directions. But there he was now, standing by inheritance, taller, a little grayer, but unmistakably him. He smiled when he saw me. Not the kind that says, "I know who you've become," but the kind that says, "I remember who you were." We didn't speak for a long moment. We just stood in the silence between who we had been and who we had become. Then he broke it with, "I always knew you were painting something more than pictures." We had coffee after the exhibit, away from the crowd, in a dimly lit cafe where the music hummed low and nobody cared who you were. Caleb told me he'd gone into art therapy, not for patients, but for caregivers. People forget, he said, that the ones who hold others up need healing too. I nodded because I knew. I had once tried to hold up Ethan. I had almost collapsed under the weight. We talked until closing, laughed more than I thought I could. I didn't feel nervous. I didn't feel watched. I felt seen. Fully, clearly, with no performance needed. But life wasn't done twisting. The next morning, Elise called me in a panic. "Era, you need to check the community board. Someone posted something about your past. Again." My stomach dropped. I opened my laptop expecting another smear, another attempt by Ethan, maybe a last grasp at control. But it wasn't that. It was a forum thread titled, "I was there when she was forgotten. I won't let her be forgotten again." The poster was anonymous at first, but then they signed it, "Miss Karen, your high school art teacher." Her message was long.
Honest.
She admitted she'd once recommended Callista, yes, the same Callista who now ran that arts foundation, for an early arts scholarship, and that she'd left my name off the application list because, as she wrote, "I assumed her family would make something of it, and Era, well, I didn't think she had the stamina." She explained how she'd watched my rise through guilt-stained glasses, how she had wanted to apologize but didn't think I'd remember her. Her final lines made my chest tighten. "Sometimes we bury the brightest lights because they threaten the shadows we're used to living in." But she was always the light, even when we couldn't admit it. The thread went viral, not in the flashy way, but in a quiet avalanche of truth. Former teachers commented. Old classmates shared stories. People I barely remembered began writing things like, "She always helped others in the art room," or "I didn't speak up when her work was overlooked. I regret that." I didn't know how to feel. Vindicated?
Sad?
Angry? Grateful? All of it and none of it. Because the truth is, healing isn't always triumph. Sometimes it's just witnessing. Being seen. Finally. That night, I didn't paint. I sat on the balcony of my apartment with a cup of tea and thought about my journey. The girl who got sick. The woman who rose. The love that left her. The one who may yet return. But most of all, I thought of the version of me that once wanted so desperately to be chosen, not just by a man, but by the world. I didn't want that anymore. I had chosen myself. A few days later, I received a phone call from a private number. I almost didn't answer, but I did. It was a lawyer. Not mine. Ethan's. Apparently, he had filed for bankruptcy. And in his list of potential brand ties, he had attempted to include my name, my image, and, get this, our past relationship as part of his public asset value. The lawyer apologized. "We're removing you from the paperwork entirely," he said, "but he's clinging to your name like it's a lifeline." I thanked him and hung up. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt free. Because I knew now, Ethan's greatest mistake wasn't leaving me when I was sick. It was assuming I'd stay sick forever, without him. And here's the last twist. I turned down a major brand deal that week. One that wanted to turn my illness story into a limited edition healing collection. Their pitch deck was beautiful. The paycheck would have been massive. But their tone? It was all tragedy turned aesthetic. Sickness sold in soft tones and sad smiles. I said no. Because I was no longer interested in turning my survival into something others could consume. I was interested in turning it into something I could own. And own it I did. 6 months later, I opened my own foundation, the Echo Project, a space for young, forgotten voices in art to be heard, funded, and celebrated. No prestige, no pay-to-play, just raw talent, honesty, and room to breathe. Caleb helped design the program. Naira handled the narrative ethics. Lydia became our youngest board advisor. At the launch, I stood in front of a room filled with artists, survivors, misfits, and magic makers. I didn't give a grand speech. Just said, this isn't about proving anything. It's about no one having to prove they're worth being seen ever again. They clapped. Not politely. Fully. And finally, I went home. Not to the small town. Not to the hospital corridors or beige-walled apartments of old memories. But home, to myself. The girl who was left behind had become the woman who would never be erased. And that was the real ending. Not love regained. Not fortune won. But truth. Fully lived. Undeniable. Unapologetic. Unforgettable.